At this point, I have years of experience putting sunscreen all over my face every single day, but I'm noticing lately when I'm running out the door for a quick errand, I'll forget to slather sunscreen on my arms. So I thought maybe a solution to my problem would be to create an easy layer to throw on with UV protective fabric. As far as I understand, UV fabric has a tighter weave to block out the sun, and I think most sewists use this UV fabric for swimsuits. But today I want to design something that covers my arms and my neck when I'm in the car. So I already cut out my self-drafted pattern last night, and today I'll be making the muslin. And there are actually two different designs I'm toying with. So one is a traditional shrug, but the only problem with the traditional shrug is they typically are just a open front, and so the fabric wouldn't come over my neck in the way that I want. So the other idea I had was to maybe make an asymmetrical opening where the fabric goes around my chest and the closure is at the shoulder. Maybe that could work. I really like that idea, but if the closure on the shoulder doesn't work, I can go back to that first design idea and maybe just add some sort of zipper and get creative with it. So let me go ahead and make my muslin today. Okay, so it's accidentally been a while since I filmed that first clip, and that's because our AC literally broke the next day, and we're okay now. The AC is fixed, but it was about 80 degrees in my studio, so I could not continue sewing, so I had to pivot and create an entirely new video to upload for my last upload. And that video actually did really well, and if you're here from that video, hi, thanks for being here. But yeah, just another great reminder about how creativity can thrive in limitations sometimes. Anyway, back to this video. So I did go ahead and sew that first muslin, and at first I didn't really like it. I specifically didn't like the collar. It was really droopy, and when the top closed, I didn't like how the neck looked. I just feel like I didn't accomplish very thoughtful pattern making when I was doing this. I kept thinking to myself, what was I thinking when I made this collar shape? And I was worried that the shoulder closure looked just a little too weird, and I was prepared to scrap it and replace it with a simple shrug with a center front opening. And then I showed it to my husband and he liked it, and specifically he liked the shoulder opening. So that made me want to see it through. And the more I saw it hung open, the more I was like, this is actually a pretty cool look. So I redrafted the collar with the help of a pattern making book, specifically the chapter on built up necklines. But what I didn't take into account was the way that I had designed the base neckline in my pattern was actually a little bit away from my neck. And so when I drafted the built up neckline, it just made the new collar like skin tight to my body, and it didn't have any excess fabric to go and stand up. And the way that it actually sucked up the fabric made the shrug not hang open in the way that I initially started to like. So I think I'm gonna go back to the shape of the first collar actually, and I'm also gonna try some stretch interfacing to give the neck just a little bit more structure so it's not so droopy. But yeah, I got a new neckline to draft. I don't think it'll be too hard. Let's get started. To correct my collar piece, I'm going to walk my pattern. First, for demonstration purposes, I'm gonna tape the overlapping seam allowances for the front and back together. To walk my pattern, I lay my collar on top of the neckline so that the seam allowances are on top of each other. I'll start with the center back, and I can see that my center back is not at a right angle, which means that if I were to sew this together, I would get a pointy shape. So I already know that I need to square this off. Next, I'll use my awl to hold my pattern in place so that the seam allowances stay on top of each other, and I'll just rotate my pattern all the way along the neckline. I'll go ahead and mark a notch where the shoulder seams line up because that would be good information, and I'll just continue this all the way along the neckline. By the way, this is why I prefer to have my seam allowances visible on my patterns while I'm developing something. I know some people don't like that, but this is just my preference. Once I get to the front shoulder, I know I'll want my collar to continue the line from the center front, so I'll just mark a line here. Really excited for today. So the only thing that I hadn't tested out in a muslin was the thumb hole. And so I did go ahead and do that yesterday, and it was really wide actually. So I'm glad I did that sample. I adjusted all my patterns and they're all cut out and ready to go today. So I'm gonna start sewing, I think, today. The first step is to cut out my patterns, and I'm going to really take my time with it because once I get sewing, this is going to come together really quickly. So yeah, I'm really excited. Let's just get into it. I started off cutting my fabric by cracking open a can of extremely necessary sparkling water. It might scare some people to have a drink out in their sewing space, but this sparkling water is clear, so I wasn't too worried about it. I always try to save as much fabric as possible when I lay my patterns out, which means I typically don't cut my fabric on the fold, but in this case, the fabric is pretty slinky, so I decided to cut on the fold to give myself the most accurate fabric cutting. Some people will tell you to use a rotary cutter and pattern weights to cut out spandex, and that might be a lot faster, but I don't find it a very enjoyable process for myself, so instead I'm using regular fabric shears and very sharp pins to pin my patterns in place. Then it was time to get sewing. I had my Bernette on the 3-thread overlock wide setting and started by joining the front and back shoulders. Then I opened up the body of my shrug and attached my sleeve cap with it laying flat. I don't always sew my sleeves in this way, but I find this method just a little easier when I'm sewing with knit fabrics, because when I attach it this way, I can sew the sleeve side seam and the body side seam all in one go. I decided to do the Thumbhole Cuffs next, and I'll link a tutorial that I used to figure out the construction on these, but I'll run down the steps pretty quickly. First, I sewed the cuff in 3 places, leaving 2 gaps. Then I folded the fabric over so the gaps laid on top of each other, and I just sewed the top and bottom pieces only, leaving the middle 2 layers free. And then I flipped it over and did the same thing on the other side. I actually used my regular machine here with a stretchy straight stitch because this was a little tricky to accomplish with the serger since you kind of need your seams to lay open. Then to attach the cuffs to my sleeve, I first basted it into place with my regular machine before I serged it because it was a little tricky to maneuver my serger in the round with pins in the way. And finally, it was time to work on the collar, and I used this knit interfacing, and at first I was having trouble getting the interfacing to adhere to the fabric, but I realized using a spray bottle gave me enough steam to do the trick. In case you're wondering, I only use interfacing on the bottom part of the collar because I just didn't want this too stiff. And then I sewed all sides of the collar except for the part that attached to the neck, and then I flipped it right sides outwards and joined the collar to the neckline. The Bernette is pretty easy to switch over to a cover stitch, but I don't really like switching back and forth, so I did this first, but I folded the front opening down so I'd have somewhere to start my cover stitch. Then I switched my Bernette over to the 3-thread cover stitch wide setting, which meant I needed to add a second needle and thread the purple bottom looper. Additionally, I needed to disengage the knife and switch over the front face plate, which might sound like a lot, but I've gotten pretty comfortable with this machine, so it only takes me about 5 minutes to do this. And then I used my cover stitch to finish all the raw edges of my shrug. Here's the final sun shrug. I especially love the closures that I did. So there's a snap on the inside, and then there's this toggle on the outside where it's visible, and the blue actually matches one of the blue stripes. I just love that. And I got this idea for the toggle actually from another YouTuber's video, Kathleen Illustrated. Go watch her video. But she used this paracording to make a little toggle, and she used another person's video actually to tie it correctly, so I'll link both videos in the description. And the cording was actually a little thick through the machine, so that's why I decided to hand stitch it. This design is meeting all my design goals. It's also giving very much clown core, which I love. Let me know in the comments down below if you'd like to see this sun shrug released as a pattern on my Etsy shop. And I hope you enjoyed watching the design process of this shrug, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!